What's going on, hybrid shooters? It's Jason Vong, and today I'm very excited to be sharing with you guys my user experience review on the new Sony a7III.
Wrong camera.
All right, so it looks like we accidentally picked up the wrong camera for today's introduction, so we're heading back right now to get the other one. But I mean, who can blame me? Both cameras look and feel nearly identical, with of course the obvious different labels in the corners, the lock button on the mode dial, the PC terminal port on the a7R III, and the Forever Alone mic port on the a7III. Obviously, there are differences in performance and features, and we'll get into that very soon. But first, we gotta talk about the similarities and why they make us so happy. The joystick, the dual SD card slots, the bigger battery. These are the things that pros and reviewers have been asking for the last couple of years now. And boom, Sony delivered. The inclusion of the joystick makes changing focus spots a lot easier and quicker. Although both cameras have the option of touch focus, having something tactile like this gives us more finer controls over our autofocus. The dual SD card slots allows for redundant recording, so in the event one card fails, you still have another card retaining all of your photos and videos from the same session. You can of course utilize the dual SD card slots differently. For instance, you can write RAW files exclusively on the first card and JPEGs on the second card, or even separate photos and video files on different cards. And if you're shooting videos, make sure to turn on auto continuous recording so when one card fills up, it will start writing to the second card seamlessly. But by far the most welcome improvement is the bigger battery. The A9 and the Series 3 cameras are sporting the new FZ100 batteries, which holds more charge and lasts way longer without bulking the camera bodies too much. It's also big enough to where I can fit a label with both my first and my last names. But seriously, that's the biggest reason why I tell my video shooters to upgrade to these cameras. You're getting about 2 to 2.5 hours of 4K 24p recording per battery. Plus, because of these new batteries, it makes shooting 4K on the Series 3 cameras no longer a struggle. For one, the screen does not dim like its predecessor. In fact, you can amp up the monitor brightness now to better gauge your shot in bright sunlight. While we're out here in the hot sun, let's just talk about it, okay? Overheating. I've experienced none of it with either of these cameras. Now in the past, my 6300 has overheated from long 4K recording, and that has long been fixed now with an update. My a7R II as well has overheated in the hot sun, but I'm happy to report that both the a7R III and the a7III was shooting out in the hot sunny weather, 80 degrees, 2.5 hours long, shooting 4K 24p, and it didn't even get an overheating signal. In fact, you cooking egg rolls here?
What?
Gosh, it's hot. I think it's me. You sure you don't want to come out in the hot sun and get a nice tan?
No, I don't like this.
You sure it feels kind of nice today? It's kind of... So what are the differences between both of these cameras? Well, let's start off with the biggest first. 42 megapixels versus 24 megapixels. The R on the a7R III stands for resolution, so it makes sense you're getting about twice of it with this camera. The advantage of having more megapixels not only shows more details, but also allows for extra flexibility and editing. There are less penalties when you're doing any sort of heavy cropping. There are a lot more data to sample off of when doing blemish control and post-processing, and of course, the ability to have larger prints. But there is a downside shooting exclusively 42 megapixels. Things can get very expensive, very fast. First, to really maximize the amount of details you can potentially get from a high-resolution camera, you would need lenses that can resolve a lot of those details, and the Sony G Master lenses are designed exactly for that. However, they do have a hefty price tag. On top of that, more storage spaces. 42 megapixels per photo is going to fill up your SD cards and hard drives faster than before, so you'll need more of them. Unfortunately, there is no option to shoot smaller RAW files, only the option to shoot smaller JPEGs. Now ideally, the folks who will be buying this camera would be in these types of businesses, including but not limited to commercial, fashion, architecture, landscape, and wildlife. But honestly, 24 megapixels is enough for anything and everything. It doesn't make the a7III any less of a professional camera. In fact, it's still pretty much the standard, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's large enough to do any large billboard-sized prints, and an absolute overkill for Instagram photos. And speaking of megapixels, I feel like it's a good time to bring up Super 35 mode. For those of you who are unaware, the Sony Alpha full-frame cameras are capable of also shooting in crop mode, meaning you can use APS-C lenses on the a7R III and the a7 III without any vignetting. The camera will crop in 1.5 times, therefore filling up the frame. So if you're transitioning from an a6000 series camera, you can still use all of your old lenses. However, the drawback is the amount of megapixels reduced when shooting in Super 35 mode. It's not as bad on the a7R III as it drops from 42 megapixels to 18, still a decent amount of megapixels to play with. But on the a7 III, you're going to be going down from 24 megapixels to 10 megapixels. With that said, some photographers who use the APS-C lenses would still shoot in full frame mode regardless, as they prefer to retain a high megapixel count and choosing to crop the vignetting in post. However, using Super 35 mode is incredibly advantageous when you're shooting 4K videos. If you're using full frame lenses, you essentially have two different sets of focal lengths. For example, the Zeiss 55mm 1.8 is 55 in full frame, but in Super 35 it's roughly 83mm. This 24-70 would be as it is in full frame, but in Super 35 it becomes a 35 to 105mm equivalent. This is incredibly helpful to get an extra reach out of your full frame lenses. Unlike in photo mode, there is minimal quality loss when shooting 4K videos in Super 35 mode. In fact, with the a7R III, you're technically getting better quality as the camera will be shooting 5K in a 4K composition, offering more details in your footage than it would in regular full frame 4K. On the other hand though, in full frame mode, the a7 III will be shooting 6K in a 4K composition, outperforming the a7R III in terms of image quality in video mode. Now, is that a big deal in the real world? Likely not, as your audience may not be able to tell a huge difference between the two unless shown side by side and you're really forcing them to pixel peep. Let's talk about the autofocus now. On paper, the a7 III has the clear advantage of 693 face detection autofocus points versus 399 on the a7R III. The a7 III has more focus points spread out on the screen, meaning it can grab and stick focus on a subject that is close or gets close to the edge of the frame. But when it comes to the speed at which both cameras grab focus, they honestly felt the same to me: fast and reliable. Both cameras are capable of continuous face detection autofocus and eye detection autofocus, just like their Series 2 predecessors, but that doesn't mean Sony didn't make any improvements. Compared to the Sony a7R II, both the a7R III and the a7 III does a great job keeping the subject's face in focus, even when it's slightly obscured. In fact, what surprised me the most was the fact that both Series 3 cameras does a great job picking up a face from quite a bit of distance away. For example, I shot wedding ceremonies, and both times, right when the doors opened up, the cameras would lock focus on the bride's face right away at the start of the aisle. And it did a great job tracking her and keeping her in focus as she walks down the aisle. In the past, the bride would have to be in a medium shot before the a7R II detects and locks focus on their face, so I'm honestly very impressed with the new autofocus performance. Thanks to the new image processors being implemented into the Series 3 cameras, photos are being written in much faster than before, thus clearing out the buffer a lot quicker. Especially on the a7R III with the 42 megapixel photos shooting both RAW and JPEG, you can get in about 76 shots versus 22 on the a7R II. I mean, just listen to that. I can't tell you how much it's been a joy to have this camera keep up with me as I get trigger happy. Also, previously on the a7R II, the camera would lock up after you max out the buffer, rendering it completely inoperable until it's finished. But now you'll be able to preview your photos while the a7R III finishes writing in the background. Tremendous improvement on this. If you're a fan of slow motion, then I got some good news for you. Both cameras are capable of shooting 120 frames per second in 1080p with no cropping, and there's a definite improvement in the image quality as well compared to the Series 2 cameras. Now, one thing I would highly advise is to avoid using S and Q when doing slow motion, as this mode shoots at a lesser bitrate per frame. Although the footage will be played back in slow motion automatically, fellow YouTuber Zed Pro Media and I did notice the quality did not match up to the footage we got when shooting in regular 60 or 120p and slowing it down in post afterwards. However, if you're doing any sort of time lapses or hyperlapses, then S&Q will be a great mode to use when shooting 1 to 15 frames. While we're on the topic of frame rates, there is a 1.2 times crop when shooting 4K 30 on the a7 III. Now, I personally don't shoot 4K 30 too often, but for folks that do, just be mindful of that. The a7R III will not have this crop. And yes, I am bummed that Sony did not include 4K 60 on either of these cameras, which was honestly the biggest deal breaker for me personally. But they were still able to hook me with a bigger battery, the joystick, the dual SD card slot, and the new color science, which I'll get into in just a bit. But our only hope of seeing 4K 60 now is in the next low-light beast, the Sony a7S III. Speaking of low light though, the a7 III's low light performance is quite on par with the current a7S II. As demonstrated by Max Yuryev, the a7 III is capable of keeping up with the a7S II as high as ISO 12800. That is honestly very impressive. For the full low light performance comparison, be sure to check out Max's video linked up here and in the description box below. In the real world, I witnessed it firsthand how clean my JPEGs and footage looked at ISO 6400. Even at 12800, it looked incredible, a number I would never ever dare touch on the a7R III, R2, and especially the 6500. Now, I know a lot of video people will be asking me this: should they not wait for the a7S III then if the a7 III's low light is already this good? Well, if you're constantly finding yourself in a dimly lit situation, and I'll throw this in too, in need of 4K 60, then yeah, maybe wait for the a7S III. But if none of those matter to you, then go ahead and get yourself the a7 III. It also has S-Log 2, 3, and hybrid log gamma profiles as well. Same goes for the a7R III, so both cameras are well equipped to do high production video work. Let's talk about in-body image stabilization. Both cameras have it and has proven to be one of the greatest blessings in camera body history, especially if you do a lot of handheld video work. But I'm gonna say the a7R III here has the slight advantage with its 5.5 axis in-body image stabilization versus just 5 on the a7 III. Now, half a stop of difference may not sound like a whole lot, but a subtle difference of extra stability is definitely there. Another subtle difference is the EVF and LCD display. Now on paper, the a7 III has a slightly lower resolution display compared to the a7R III, but when I'm out on the field, it's not something that I notice when jumping back and forth between two cameras. However, others have reported the a7 III has a similar soft display like the a7R II, so for video shooters who rely on punch-in manual focus a lot, it will be a little hard to gauge focus, so you may want to consider an external monitor. The a7R III has a sharper display, and I can confirm the punch-in manual focus on this camera is much better. In fact, I just found out during this review that the sunny weather monitor brightness is noticeably brighter on the a7R III than it is on the a7 III. Now, what's not a subtle difference is the newly implemented color science in the Series 3 cameras, which I think a lot of Canon switchers are going to be happy about when they come over to Sony. Both cameras now favor the red tones a little more. Alright, so we spent a little too much time on the video portion of this review, so let's get back onto the photography track. Let's talk about off-camera flash options. Most Sony shooters are using Flashpoint or GODOX. They're both the same thing. They're relatively inexpensive compared to the other competition out there for the quality that you're getting. The most popular one right now is the eVOLV 200 model, which is equivalent to 3 speed lights. Great for outdoor portraits and perfect for wedding receptions. If you're looking for something that can overpower the sun or just more power in general, then consider the Explore 600 model. For general speed lights, look into the R2 units. I have a more in-depth buying guide on these flashes, so click up here to check it out. Alright, there are a couple of bees pollinating the flowers right now. What a magical moment, and I'm just firing shots away thanks to the silent shooting feature. It allows me to capture this magical moment without disturbing my surrounding. Perfect for quiet events and weddings too. Oh shit!
There's not even any bees.
However, if you start to notice any banding in your photos, you want to turn off silent shooting and electronic front curtain off, as those are some of the known causes to that issue. Alright, so it's time for everybody's least favorite topic, money. How much of it are you going to have to take from your kids' college savings fund? Well, the a7R III is going to run you about $3,200, while the a7 III will run you about $2,000. If at this point of the review you're still going to be asking me if the a7R III is worth the extra $1,200 over the a7 III, then go ahead and get yourself the a7 III. Trust me on it. Take the extra money and get yourself some decent prime lenses. There will be folks out there who would know if they need the 42 megapixels or not. Now, if you're coming from an older Sony a7 or a6000 series camera, then absolutely I think either of these cameras are definitely worth the upgrade. A6000, A63, A6500 users, if you've been wanting to hop on the full frame train for a while now, then there's no better time to do it than with the a7 III. A7, A7 II users, you're going to find the autofocus performance on the a7 III tremendously improved, light years ahead of your current model. A7R2, A7S II users, the bigger battery alone would make you want to cross over. It certainly made me do it, and I've never been happier. Was there anything that I missed in this video? Were there anything crucial that you discovered from both of these cameras that you feel like current Sony users and potential future Sony users should know? Leave in the comments down below. As time goes on, more experiences will be unfolded, new tips and tricks will be discovered, so definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel for future micro updates on both the a7R III and the a7 III. Give this video a like and leave in the comments down below which camera you decide to pick up after watching this review. Both cameras, all of the lenses, all of the accessories that I used and featured in this video are linked in the description box below, so don't forget to check that out. Guys, I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace!